Welcome and welcome back to the Light Renegades. My name is Starr. You are going to have to bear with me today, everyone, because we are in melt-worthy temperatures over here in the UK. So I am going to be using a trusty hand fan at some points of this video also. And today is going to be a mishmash, everyone, because I've been guided to review and also bring forward some expressions that has been on this journey and this pathway for me. So I'm being told to firstly share that I've just ate some watermelon. I don't know why that's significant, but I'm sharing it. I'm being told that that's going to be a synchronicity or something for someone. But I did want to do a recap of where I've been, what had been happening since I think it was early December that I stopped making videos. And I titled the video The End because I felt like I was coming to an end of such a deep chapter of my life. I feel like I was in a cycle that was perhaps about 15 years that I'd come through with certain expressions, and I very much felt like there had to be a closing over this space because things have changed. A lot have changed over here for all of us Light Renegades, personally, myself and Maria and Cabello. So we didn't know what was going to happen. I personally wasn't sure what was going to happen in that time, but after I stopped making videos over here, everything just collapsed in on itself, myself included, and I was very much taken on this real dark, treacherous path of understanding where I'd been in this expression and what I was having to shed. And I completely forgot to look up something before I started recording, but that's going to come in at a later date. But I think the date about that is very significant. But where do I want to start? So I think December was me collapsing in on self. December was me just releasing everything that I've been feeling over in this space because I really hadn't had time to process everything that had happened on my awakening path, because it just felt like everything started and then it just continued to snowball. And there were so many things that had happened to me that was so extreme that I feel like I wasn't able to comprehend it in the physical body. I felt like I had to just make sense of it in terms of only my higher level senses, because to try and bring it into the 3D level of existence, the 3D body, it just purely didn't make any sense. And I was guided to remember some aspects of this pathway last night in some really extreme spaces that I had been in. And I think it was about 2022 when the Galactic Federation of Light stepped forward and said that they wanted me to start sharing information about galactic spaces. And at that time, you know, it was only a few months in before that started to happen that I was even told that galactic energy existed. This was not where I started my journey. I started off in a space of awakening into something, and I would see space a lot when I started to meditate, but that was as far as it went in terms of a galactic expression, apart from some automatic writing that I did at a certain point. I was very much in the realm of just sensing energy. And I want to say I went down the route of understanding and connecting with spirit guides and spirit teams. So pause that understanding there, because galactic energy came much later. So I was on a pathway for about 2 years before galactic spaces even came ever present into my life. And this started as a very crunching energy that was coming in when I was doing tarot readings for others. And I just felt this pressure and this resistance coming in from somewhere. And I just thought, what is this energy? I could feel something coming in. It felt like it was coming through to my head. And I was like, I don't know what this is. I feel like something's coming in. And I don't know how many months or weeks that was until it finally came to fruition. So I was outside on my exercise bike. Well, I went to uncover my exercise bike that I have outside, and a moth came out of the covering of this exercise bike and landed on my hand. And I was looking at this moth and I was just captivated. I couldn't stop. And I shook my hand, I blew on this moth, and it wouldn't go away. And I was like, something's happening. And I could feel this energy just wash over me of something that felt like home, something that I felt like I knew that I'd experienced before, but there was no words for it. And in that time, when that moth landed on my hand, I heard, you are a Pleiadian starseed, and this is your life path. And every inch of my body, it was like a knowing. It was just like a deep knowing, a deep resonance. And I thought, okay, this is where it starts. And that's when everything started to go in this galactic expression. And how myself, Anna Maria, and Cabello came to be together is a story all in for itself, which we perhaps will share at a later date when we can all get together and perhaps share that story together. But everything that has been on this pathway has just been so divinely orchestrated and guided that it's impossible to try and correlate it all, you know, in one single video. So I think this is why I've been given snapshots of what had happened. But in that time of me learning that I was a Pleiadian starseed, understanding that, I started to channel galactic expressions. This was after I'd met Cabello. I started to delve deeper into channeling because I didn't know that was what I was doing. I thought I was reading tarot cards. I wasn't. I was channeling. So Cabello encouraged me to understand what channeling was. I had no idea what that was. I didn't know this is what people did. I thought people just read cards. I knew that people spoke to spirit, but channeling information from galactic spaces was not in my repertoire of understanding. I had no idea about any of this. And I haven't even been guided to watch that many other people's channels since become awakened or channeling for myself. It was very much I was kept in my own bubble of energy, my own way that I was doing things, because I think it would have kind of muddied my waters, and I might have been trying to do things in a very different way, and teams really wanted me to just be streamlining in what I was here to do. So that happened. Me and Cabello started speaking. I started to channel the Galactic Federation of Light, and that's when everything just started to take this full galactic turn. And I was guided to remember super late last night a time when I was laying in bed, and I had headphones on at the time, and I was in between this state of meditation and what felt like another energy coming into my peripheral. And I felt something pull the headphones off of my head, and at the same time my leg went up in the bed. And I don't know how to describe this, but it felt like through my big toe something was trying to pull my soul out of my body. And I couldn't move. I could just feel my essence leaving my body. And I want to say it got about probably this far away from my toe as it was being pulled out, until I snapped back into my body and I jumped into the bed. And the being that was around me at the time was called Tahoe. He was my close guardian at that time, and that's a deep story for another day. Maybe I'll share it after I share this story. They came into me and they said, you know, we've blocked whatever that energy was, but they were here for nefarious expressions. And it's not the first time that I've been in situations like that. And I was also guided to remember when I'd woken up from a dream and I just had the most excruciating energy in the pit of my stomach. It was fear beyond anything that I could possibly share with you. And I just knew that something had happened. I just knew that something wasn't right. And I knew something also wasn't right because the tunnels in my ear, the tunnels of my earrings, the tunnels that are my earrings in my ears had come out of my ears. And one was at the top of my bed and one was at the bottom of my bed. And I was like, how does that happen? How does my tunnel out of my ear get to the bottom of my bed? And I remember standing up out of bed, and it was the middle of the night, and I went downstairs and I went to get a glass of water, and I just said, what has happened? And everyone was deadly silent. All of my teams, everything else were deadly silent. And I said, I know something has happened. Tell me what has happened. And it was still deathly silent. And this is the point when I got angry. I was like, effing tell me what has happened, because I can feel it. And he said, we wiped your memory because we don't want you to remember. And Tahoe came into me, and I had a sense of being sat at the end of my bed, crying and being physically held in the 3D by a presence, and having two other beings stood in front of me. But they had wiped my memory as much as they could from happening, but I could still feel it in the pit of my stomach. There was just this energy and this vibration of, this doesn't feel right. And you know, so much has happened that is just so extreme on this path that I know that I sound like I've completely lost my mind to some. I can understand that, and I fully appreciate that now from the seat that I'm in, but it has been my lived experience. So it's difficult to try and portray everything that has happened, because I think you only understand it if you've experienced these things yourself. And this is why I felt so strongly about continuing to show up and to share my story and to share the things that have happened to me, because it is not just me. And over the weekend I went to go and see Disclosure, the film of Steven Spielberg, and I thought a lot about this movie. I think that I might do a whole video about the movie, so I'm not going to say too much. But the one thing that stuck out to me was that, you know, the film is prefaced around two beings in particular, two human beings, and their experience, and it being just about them too. And I thought, it's not just about two people. It's never just about me. You know, there were so many people out here that have been experiences of so many different things, not just galactic spaces, you know, spiritual spaces, all this type of stuff, cryptid spaces, Bigfoots, all of this type of thing, mermaids, everything. It's all out there. So I think the minute that you start to open yourself up to something, that's when everything else can, you know, make itself known to you as well. And I shared a story actually with family members the other day of a little being that I saw on my altar space. And this was me, I think it was when I just woken up, or when I was about to go to sleep. It must have been when I just woken up. Or was it when I went to sleep? No, I think it was when I was going to sleep. And I looked over to my altar space, which is by the side of my bed. And I just saw this tiny boy just skipping around, dancing around in like tatters of clothing. It looked like rags that had been stitched together, and they were spinning and they were walking around, and then they kind of hitched their arm up on something that was on my altar. It must have been a crystal or something like that, and they just tilted their head and they smiled at me. And the smile that they gave me was just to tell me, yes, we are real, and yes, we are true. And I have a very specific memory of going into my dad's mum's, my grandmother's pond that she had in the back garden. I remember sitting there, and I remember speaking to fairies while I was there, while I was a child. And, you know, things like this only come back to you when you are able to accept this level of just something else that is out there. And I share all of this to kind of preface where I was in December, because in December, I got taken back to a space that I'd been into before, but this was like the deepest that I'd ever been in this space. And this was through dream time. And coincidentally enough, you know, all aligned to work out for the highest good, that me and a friend had been somewhere for the day, and we ended up stopping off at a health food store. And in the health food store, there was this gigantic tub of peanut butter, like a bucket-sized tub of peanut butter that was on the counter for discounted prices. Sometimes the store does this. And for some reason, I felt like I just needed this peanut butter. Like, I like peanut butter, but not that much. And I just thought, I'm supposed to take this. And she looked at me and she went, what do you mean? I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to get this. And she was like, why? And I was like, I don't know. She was like, are you going to bake something? I was like, I don't think so. But I feel like I'm supposed to take it. And I trust, you know, I trust when I feel something, it will make itself known to me. I was like, maybe it's not for me. Maybe I'll give it away to someone. Who knows? So I took this tub of peanut butter. Little did I know that not a week later, I wasn't going to be able to stomach eating anything else but this tub of peanut butter. So what had happened was, in my dream time, I was taken into spaces to be working with Mr. C, which was a vampiric energy that I had met on this journey. So there's conversations out there, interview with a vampire, I called it. Mr. C is out there in this expression. And now, you know, I'd gone through a time of understanding where I've been in certain expressions of this journey. But there were times when I came to the conclusion that I've known a lot of beings in a lot of spaces, and I don't know how to make this make sense other than this is what has been shown to me. This is what I feel in my heart to be my truth. So I was taken into spaces to be helping Mr. C and helping in other expressions of life through my dream time. And there were times when I'd wake up in the morning and I'd feel like the taste of blood in my mouth, and I don't eat meat. And there were times when I'd wake up and I feel like my stomach was full, even though I hadn't eaten anything. All I was doing was mostly fasting and eating peanut butter, because the smell of anything, I don't eat meat anyway, but the smell of absolutely anything was just turning my stomach, trying to put anything in my mouth that was of a different texture than peanut butter. It felt like it was hurting my mouth. So it's an interesting expression that I find myself in it sometimes. And even my cycle had stopped for 2 weeks completely. And I thought, oh, of course, how can I be bleeding if I'm going into other spaces working with vampiric energy? I was like, this makes the most amount of sense to me. And not shortly after that, Shauna Earl Francis and I met each other in Bath. And I think just the timing of all of that, you know, Shauna happened to just be able to have a layover so that we could get together. And I needed Shauna at that time. I was so densely in these spaces that when I met her, you know, my everything was just completely fragmented. And that's when I knew that I had to close the door on some things and some expressions that I'd already been in, because my vibration was rising too high to be in those spaces. I felt absolutely just the most amounts of chaotic energy somewhere. And this is what's helped me differentiate the different categories and spaces that we are in. And I felt for the longest time I was sat smack bang in the middle of light energies and shadow energies, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why I was able to see both so clearly, but also have a layer of me feeling like I knew darker spaces just as much as I knew shadow. And you know, you've all seen me come through this expression of working with Luciferian energy to a certain degree, going through my expression of understanding Lucifer and bringing Lucifer forward in a space of this shadow expression for some to work through. Now, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I came to a point where I had to decide, and I didn't even know that that was something that I had to do. I felt this energy come over me, and it was like, where does your heart lie? And I went, what do you mean? And it was like, where does your heart lie? And I said, well, you know, if I have to take a side, of course it's with the light. So all of my Luciferian, nefarious, negative timelines were collapsed in on self. Now, this was a space that I was working in with regards to the Freemasonic energy and working with certain celebrities at certain times and beings that I brought forward in that expression, which then wants me to lead into this expression of the Epstein files. And I can't explain to all of you and express enough just how much I felt like that was the predominant energy of why the Light Renegade space was created, at least for my fractal, of bringing forward information in that space. I don't remember the date, which I didn't look up. This is the thing that I was talking about, which I didn't look up before I pressed record. I wish I had, because the day that I found out that the files have been dropped, I just completely collapsed to my knees, and I cried and I cried and I cried and I cried. And there was this energy that washed over me that was just like, oh my gosh, like, that's it, like, job well done. Like, I'd done it. It felt like I felt like I'd done my whole entire life path. I was like, that's it, I'd done it. That was it. That was what I was bringing forward. And at that time, when a fractal of Jeffrey Epstein's energy stepped forward, it didn't make sense to me. But all I knew was that this was what I was supposed to do. And the way that it's been posed to me was this expression of, you know, if there wasn't enough compassion for that being in this space, then those files wouldn't have been able to be dropped. And this wasn't just me. This was all of you bringing forward this information. And yes, we are a small collective of people, of beings here that are watching these videos, but our energy, you know, however many it is here, say it's 30 here, it's 30,000 in terms of the energetic vibration, because you understand it. And each soul here has raised their vibration enough to be able to pummel out a lot of this energy. So I knew that it was job well done over here, everyone. So the amount of gratitude that I had in my heart for each and every soul that has been here, that has supported the Light Renegade space, I just knew that this is what we came here to do. And I don't know how to make it make sense, because it doesn't. By rights, you know, some of you have never met me in person, yet you feel like family. Some of you have said the most beautiful things to me that, you know, somewhere it still feels like, do I deserve that? But I know that we're all soul family. I know that we've all met each other before. This is why we've come back together this lifetime. And at certain points, I feel like that was the only saving grace for me to not just completely shatter behind the scenes, because my life didn't make sense. My life hasn't made sense to the normal expression for a very long time. And I had nothing really around me to help me stay in this vibration, in this energy. And that's not to say my friends and family have been super duper supportive, you know, in certain circumstances, and really just held me in a space of, look, we don't know exactly what's going on with you, but we trust you and we see you, and we understand that, you know, whatever is happening for a reason, and we trust you. And, you know, this is the healthiest that I've been in my life. And I feel like that's been the only thing that's allowed for my family to really allow for me to be in these spaces and to trust me when I say, you're just gonna have to trust me. Because before my awakening, you know, I was a mess. I was like a hot mess. Every inch of my life was just, it felt so painful to me. And as much as these spaces are painful, the clarity and the understanding and how much I'm the healthiest that I've ever been in my life, you know, I think allows for everyone to see, okay, whatever's going on, something must be going right, because this is the most sound that I've seen. Maybe insane to some, but this is the most sound that I've seen. This is the most, I want to say mature that I've been. This is the most sober that I've been ever in my life. And it's taken a long time to get there. And I think that now that when everyone looks back at my life, this just makes sense to them. And my mom, you know, especially, she's just like, this makes sense to me. And I went to go and see Disclosure with my family, and my mom was crying through the whole thing, because she said, I think I finally understand what this path has felt like for you. And she was like, I understand that, you know, it doesn't make sense to everyone, but yet it's so real and true for you. And my mom has had experiences, you know, and it's funny because she just brushes it off so easy. And I felt like this about the entirety of my family. All of my family have such incredible experiences and stories, but they just brush it off as normal, because somewhere, you know, it is normal. And every being on this planet, I don't think, doesn't have a story that doesn't make sense. But for the entirety of my life, there's just been so many things that have happened, and there's been certain friends that have been around, certain partners that have been around at certain times of my life, that I think when they look back at it now, I make sense to them. They're like, I get it. They're like, we get it. We was there. We've seen this. We've seen this numerous times from you. There were things that I was saying, people were like, what do you mean? And I was like, I don't know. There were certain times in this life when I just said, I feel like something's trying to speak to me. And everyone would just be like, oh, she's off again, you know, because I'm quite an eccentric person. I'm quite jokey. I'm quite silly. I will say just anything that comes to mind, you know, and I've really had to just allow for myself to be myself. But this is the most mature that I've had to be in these spaces, because behind the scenes, you know, I'm kind of not like this. I'm pretty silly, and I like to laugh a lot. So it was very different for me to be in this space and take on, I want to say this, I don't even know what to call it, persona of being this. And you know, the way that I speak to teams of light and the ways that this just clicked into place for me. I don't know how to make it make sense, but everything happened and it just made the most amount of sense to me. And I just knew this is what I was supposed to do. I just knew this is the space that I was supposed to be. And the people that have been put on my life path in this expression, Cabello, Anna Maria, Shauna Earl Francis, all of her star sisters that have been brought into my life have all created this pathway for me to be able to exist in this. But at the same time, I had a whole other life that I had to walk away from that, you know, was painful to myself, was painful to those people around me. And I didn't have, you know, the knowing that I know now. And all I just had to say was that I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. This doesn't feel the same. And I just don't think that this is the path. And, you know, it was painful at those times because I knew that other people could see that I was slipping away from them. Whatever was going on with me, they felt like I was somewhere else. And I could feel it too. It was like this, I don't know what is going on, but I don't feel like I'm here. And I know that so many in this understanding are going to appreciate that. And sometimes we get taken on spaces and we get taken on different avenues and different pathways because this is what our soul is meant to do. And whatever, you know, version of this is in your life, I think you just have to trust it. And I have other family members that are on different pathways to mine that's spiritual in nature, but very, very different, but very extreme in its understanding in certain circumstances. You know, they are taking on a very specific strain of, I want to say, God or angelic frequency or other expressions out there, and this has been their personal experiences too. And I know this is what has been a lot of your experiences out there, which is why I think it's so important that we do come together and share our stories, because I think this is going to help us map out the true existence of what has been happening, because I don't believe we've been told the full truth. And there were certain circumstances within this paradigm that I knew I was collapsing down that expression. When the Epstein files dropped maybe a week before that, I had the most amount of chaotic energy in my expression. There was a night where I genuinely felt like I might just snap and that would be it. I was laying in bed and I felt really strange the entirety of that day. But when I went to bed, I felt this crippling energy around me. And then I started to just see, my body started to vibrate, and then back to back, I was seeing the most horrific images you could ever possibly imagine. And then the circle appeared of symbols, spinning and spinning and spinning in red, spinning and spinning and spinning in red. And when I closed my eyes, the visions were there. When I opened my eyes, the visions were there. And that's when, I'll be honest, everyone, I was absolutely terrified. When you open your eyes and you are still seeing visions of things that you don't want to see, and you can't close or open your eyes to stop that, that is when I felt like, oh my gosh, like this might be the point where I genuinely snap and I get sent somewhere else. You know, they put me in a padded cell, who knows, but I just wasn't sure if it was going to stop. And it went on for what felt like an eternity. And now looking back, I can understand where I was placed in a space to push through and filter all of this energy that was coming from these Epstein files in order for them to be dropped in a certain space. And now we're not the only collectives that have been doing this. I've seen other people share other expressions of how they felt when the Epstein files dropped and how they felt like there was a part of this too. It is not just us. We are one of so many out there in this world that are working on these similar understandings, and everyone comes from their different perspectives. And I feel like everything is so very valid and true, which is why it's been difficult to try and find my voice here, because things that I was talking about in 2023 only are now coming to fruition. And I've heard other channels now speaking about something that I was speaking about at the beginning of 2023 and no one else was talking about it. I just thought, have I fully lost it? Why does my pathway not look like everyone else's? And I've always been told, you know, to just trust in myself and trust in where I am. But I knew I was looking and delving into spaces that people didn't want to see. When I started talking about the shadow, when I started talking about this expression of Luciferian energy or demonic forces, and there being a space where there had to be compassion, you know, so many was like, that's it, like I'm out. And I completely understand that. And certain circumstances, depending where you're working from, you know, it's not safe to have that understanding. There were spaces that I went to too where I had to close down this Luciferian expression because it was no longer helpful to me. And, you know, at a certain point, I've been offered a lot of, let's say, contracts, a lot of things where I had to be honest with myself, and I had to decide where I wanted myself to go, where I wanted my soul to go. And there were certain circumstances where I'd almost skipped ahead in my awakening. And I was told this, which is why I felt like I've just been in a waiting period for some time, everyone, because there were some things I wrapped up quicker than they expected. There were certain things that took me a little longer than we had anticipated, when we had planned. You know, I don't even know what plot or plan we are on at this moment, especially in the Light Renegade space. You know, I think we're probably at plan, I don't know, close to Z at this point, but nothing ever truly goes to plan most of the time. And this just had to be something that we just took to heart and just said, okay, like whatever happens from here, we just trust it. And this is what we did, opening this Light Renegade space. It was such a leap of faith for myself, Cabello, and Anna Maria, and so much happened behind the scenes. It was just the most amounts of chaotic and upsetting for all of us, and I hope that I get to share those stories at some point, because I think it's important for this fabric of what is true reality. And there were certain times on this journey where I knew if I'd said things, people just wouldn't believe me, so I held back on certain expressions. And I now feel like I'm coming to the point where I can share ever deeper what has truly been going on behind the scenes, because we are ready for it. And like I said, it always just felt like I was holding back just a bit, because it felt like if I'd shared things too soon, people and beings just weren't ready for it. And there were certain circumstances where I was frustrated left, right, and center, because it was like, I want an answer to this question. And now I realize why I couldn't get answers to my questions, because if I know this changes the fabric of reality somewhere, which I know sounds pretty grandiose to say, but that's how I feel it as truth. If I was to know fully exactly what is happening in certain spaces, this would change the trajectory of not just for myself, but other beings around me that I know that I'm working in tandem with. So I think teams of light have had to be very careful as to what information they are giving me, what information they are giving souls around me, so that we can all work in tandem together, and in this streamlined expression that some things just work out so to the T that I know I haven't planned it. Like I said, certain circumstances and things that happen my whole entire life path, my awakening story, there are things that happen that I just think, I slow clap to everyone. And there were certain times where I'm absolutely on my knees in the most amount of thanks to my teams of light for what they have managed to bring forward to me, and the things and the experiences that I've had. So I'm grateful, everyone. So that's where I was. I went through this expression of vampiric energy. I met up with Shauna Francis. That was kind of like my recalibration space. And then I came into a space of now having to decide how I wanted my life to look. And like I said, I was told to make this decision of where my heart lied, and my heart was, definitely in light spaces. So they closed down a lot of my shadow aspects that I'd already worked through. And like I said, I don't think you're supposed to stay in those shadow spaces depending on what life path you're in. And I think I'm going to pause that for a discussion at a later date. But there is a differentiation in the spaces, everyone, which I feel like I've always been able to feel. And I feel like at a certain point I got took to the absolute edges of the highest of high, and absolute to the edges of the lowest of the low. And at some point you have to see those as equal, negative and positive, all at the exact same time. And yeah, I'm going to pause that discussion also for a later date, but I just wanted to give everyone a snapshot of where I was. And consistently over the past few weeks, my head has just been consistently turned to be looking at Christianity again, delving into the Bible with fresh eyes, and just thinking, this just doesn't add up. And I don't want to offend anyone in these spaces, but there are things that I've now witnessed where I think, where does this fit into this paradigm? And there are things, that I've played devil's advocate on my path. There was a certain time where after everything, kind of settled down, I just went, I don't want to speak to anyone because I don't know what has been happening. I was sat in the most amounts of pain. Nothing made sense to me. I looked at my life and I felt like I just completely tore my life apart. And I thought, what for? What have I done this for? Seemingly I was in my bratty energy. I was like, nothing has worked out like I wanted it to. Nothing was worked out how I was told it was going to. What have I done this for? And I wasn't looking at all the positives that was in my life. So I cut everyone off. I cut everything off. And I was just like, I just need to be left. And Teams of Light said, we expected you to go through that time. We understood it. This is part of your processing. And I'm not the only one. There are other souls around me that have also been in this space too. There was times when none of us Light Renegades wanted to be here. None of us wanted to be in these expressions because it was so inherently painful to us. And in an expression there, you don't make sense to everyone else. There were certain people on this pathway that don't even tell their friends and family this is what they are experiencing, and I understand it, but I can't hide this anymore. And this is why I removed myself from certain spaces too. It's not because I didn't care about people, but what I had to share wasn't going to make sense to you. I didn't even know, I really had to build up to have normal conversations, because that's just not where I was, and I wasn't supposed to be in those spaces. So I removed myself, and now I can have the small talk as much as I dislike it. I can have those conversations. I can get into that energy of being with other people, and spaces of community, so people that aren't in that exact same as expression as me, I can appreciate their life and their story. But at a certain point I was just deep in missions, and I wasn't supposed to be in that space, and now I understand it. But I've had to integrate back into everyday life, as we call it, because I just wasn't there for the longest time. And I know that I didn't make sense to many because they just didn't have a space, a point of reference to understand what I was saying. But I think something has shifted. Within 2026, something shifted. I felt this energy and I thought, I'm going to make more sense to more people. And that is exactly what has happened. All of a sudden, I've looked around and I have souls around me that are speaking a similar language to me. I have souls around me that are speaking and had experiences very similar to mine, you know, if it's not in the galactic sense, in the spiritual sense. And I'm just ever grateful to be, you know, where I am in this present given time and in the spaces that I'm in, and meeting souls and being able to help them, you know, not feel strange, not feel weird, not feel like they are alone, because we're all in this together. And I think the true fight isn't with, you know, this expression of whatever is happening right now. I think that everything has been posed and put in such a space and understanding for us to just be fighting one another, as opposed to all looking from our seat and our perspective and saying, okay, let's map out what truly has been happening so that we can get a full understanding of what the truth truly is out there right now. And I couldn't help but keep looking at strict doctrine and the galactic awakening and just saying, yeah, like there are some spaces where, you know, I think this expression of demonic presences in galactic spaces is definitely present. There are some spaces where I see this correlation between, you know, people saying the fall of the angels, other spaces and times from biblical expressions. This is connected to this galactic understanding and brought through an occult expression. At the beginning of my awakening, I was looking at the occult, I was looking at spaces of galactic presence, and I was looking at angels. And at one point I was like, angels and aliens are exactly the same thing. And I didn't know how to make that make sense, but it does somewhere, everyone. And I think that might be discussions for another day, because I think that where I'm at right now, I still don't have a concrete voice for some things that I want to bring forward. And I didn't come back because I didn't have anything to say, everyone. I completely shattered. I was kind of working through expressions that I knew that I needed to close down. I wasn't going to be in missions in the same way that I was. It's actually flipped into my dream time that I'm doing a lot of that mission work. Again, I'm going to do a whole video about dreams and how important they are to this expression, because everything is the same. The waking life, the dream time life, the vision space, it's all the same thing. So I think that that's all I want to share today. No, I'm going to go into this first, and then I'm going to close it down, because I feel like that might be the next lot of channelings that I do. And it's interesting, the thing that I've used to waft myself down with, and this is from Rock and Realm, and they are beautiful crystal tellers, but they've got the platonic solids on this card. So the platonic solids are what make up this entire universe, and I feel like this might be important for some to go and research. There is a whole series on Gaia TV, which, you know, questionable expressions in that space, everyone. I'm not going to lie, that's how I feel about it. But for the most part, there is a series about the platonic solids. It is incredible with regards to moving energy through the body, and that helping you in your ascension process. So that might be important to some. But also what happened in this time of Christmas, of me being in vampiric spaces, this idea of, I want to say, a biblical strain through my life just became ever present. And it was a year ago when this happened. It was a year ago when I said to you that ever omnipresent force came forward to me, and this voice said that they were God. And that took me on a whole journey of being like, okay, how does this fit in with the things that I've personally experienced? Because, you know, galactic expressions isn't in the Bible. It is to me, if you look at it through the eyes of, you know, I want to say the, how do I want to word this? The expressions of how things play out in the Bible, how time is used, how, you know, specific cloaks or daggers or whatever is used. Like, to me, that is a quantum expression. I want to try and get away from galactic, a quantum expression. That's the only way for it to make sense. You know, when beings come from here or angels come from here to meet this criteria or this expression, that is a quantum expression in the biblical sense. So there was this strain that consistently kept coming through. And as much as I couldn't get on with the idea of God being a man, something that was always ever present in my awakening right from the beginning was Mother Mary, was Mary Magdalene. And this was an expression that I brought through a very, very long time ago, and that hasn't left me. And over Christmas time, you know, I think this was, I think this might have been just before I went into the vampiric energy again. And I was in the bathtub, and all of a sudden, I felt this energy coming over me, and I felt like I was pregnant. I felt like I was pregnant. I felt confused. I felt just the most amount of sadness that I ever felt. And I was trying to place where this was. You know, was this another lifetime of mine? Was this something that was happening in the parallel? Was I picking up on someone else's energy? And then I just had this strong sense in this notion, and I was like, oh, this is how Mother Mary felt when she was pregnant with Jesus. And I just thought, wow, 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 wow. And that hadn't left me. And at a certain point, I was guided to create a playlist that was titled Mother Mary, because I have done a channeling over here already about Mother Mary. And it was on another channel that I brought through two different expressions between Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, that was whole different ceremonies within themselves. So this idea of the divine feminine coming forward in this way with Mother Mary, I think is incredibly potent and powerful for some. And, you know, this idea of idolizing anything but God, I think, is frowned upon in certain circles. So, you know, only take what resonates, but all I can work with and share is my personal experience of that. And this idea of, you know, a miraculous conception. At some point in this journey, I nursed a child that had come from a different lifetime into this one. And that journey and that time was perhaps one of the most difficult periods of this awakening story. And I didn't know how to explain it to anyone because I knew that it didn't make sense, but it was something that was very real and true in my expression. And it was so hard. It was so hard to sit with. It was so hard to try and make it make sense. It was so hard to, I think, come to terms with, because it was just so expressive. But at the same time, every inch of my being knew that this soul was mine, that knew that I had been a mother in another time, another lifetime, and I was placed here, and it was still attached to me. And the information that I was given was that I was plucked from one lifetime into this one to have this awakening story, to have and help out in this timeline. So there was things that I needed to, you know, work through from that lifetime into this one. So that was an incredibly challenging time in my life. But every inch of my body just knew that it was my truth, even if it wasn't anyone else's at that time, anyone else that was connected. I felt this in every inch of my being, and I've always just had to go with what felt real and true to me, even when it was so painful. I knew that that expression was mine. And, you know, I'm ever grateful that I've had that time. I know that that soul is out there. They are doing their missions. They are doing what they need to do. That soul reincarnated again, you know, and they're on the path, and they're going to go through their awakening story, you know, when it is time. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if I'll ever be able to be in contact with them, you know, in this present existence, and they'll be able to find me. Who knows? I'm not given that information. And if I'm being completely honest, everyone, it's not something that I like to delve into myself a lot, because yeah, it's a lot. It's very much a lot. So I think I'm gonna just pause it here, everyone. And I knew I was gonna get emotional about something, and there were some things that I didn't expect to speak about today, but I'm trusting the timing of everything. I'm trusting that some things, you know, we have to just share when we feel called. But I wanted to give everyone a snapshot of where I've been, and to just say where I'm at right now is delving back into expressions of research again, in terms of our origins and where we come from and what this means, because this idea of the biblical strain now being present in our timelines, I think, is very real and true. And at a certain point, like I said, I was looking at the parallels, and it was only, I think, maybe 3 weeks ago, I was like, how have I missed this? How have I absolutely missed this? And I can't remember which tradition it comes from, and I think it's from the Hebrew expression of Saint Bartholomew. And I live on Saint Bartholomew's Road. This is my, you know, this is where I live for a lot of my lifetime. This is my childhood home. And looking at the story of Saint Bartholomew, I was like, that's been my life path. He asked Jesus to show him everything, and Jesus shows him everything. And I was like, well, I can close the book here. Now I understand why I've been going through everything that I've been going through. I live on Saint Bartholomew's Road. So this understanding of, you know, sometimes we are interwoven into the fabric of everything to help bring different strains of energy is very real and true. And I believe this has been my life path. It's been my life path that I bring forward expressions, because we're now ready to face them at a deeper capacity. And I feel like it might be a lot to try and add on to the end of this, but I want to say, just map out your life path. This is something that I was bringing forward with these full circle moments. Map out your life path. Look at where you've been, look at places you've lived, look at names of things, look at marker points in your journey of times that you've awakened, times that you've had different souls enter your expression, because I think it's important to understand yourself. And this was always something that I was asking for. I was like, just show me who I am, show me why I'm here. And I wasn't able to see it all, because I was on different expressions of this journey for very specific reasons. And, you know, the Epstein files was a huge part of that. So I want to extend my gratitude for every single soul that is here, because, you know, we did it. It very much felt like job well done by us all, everyone. And I couldn't have done it without you. I couldn't have done it with all of us Light Renegades. Cabello, you will always be, you know, the absolute bestest star brother that I could ever have asked for. Anna Maria will always be the bestest wifey for lifey star sister that I could ever have asked for. And, you know, these were souls that at a certain point I'd never met either of them in person, yet they felt more like family than my present given family, you know, this lifetime. And I feel like that just shows the truth and the validity of these spaces. And I brought through a lot today, everyone. Apologies, I got quite emotional at a certain point. I wasn't expecting to speak about that. But there is just so much that happens in a space of awakening that I think that many are terrified to share. And I put out this request before and I said, you know, if you want to share your story with me, please do, because I think it's going to be important for us to share our truth, to share who we are. And I know that that's the only reason why I do have souls in my lifetime right now that I can understand and they can understand me, is because I dared to share my truth. And, you know, those people that came towards me, you know, they were like, oh my gosh, finally there's someone that can understand what I've got to say, that can appreciate what I've got to say. And I just held space. And, you know, I'm hoping in time that more people want to share their story, more people want to be in this space, because it wasn't ever supposed to be just us. The Light Renegade space was supposed to be a network of beings coming together and working in these spaces. And I wanted to extend a hand and say, you know, if there's certain things that you've heard me speak about, but you think that I'm not the practitioner to help you, you know, there was a lot of people that I have behind the scenes that work in very beautiful ways and in very succinct ways and very specific aspects of awakening, and some souls that have been on this pathway a lot longer than I have, that are incredibly gifted and talented in conversing with all realm, space and time. And, you know, they might be the person to help you in your awakening path. And I know that they wouldn't mind me sharing that. So if you feel like there is something that you want to delve deeper into, and you perhaps feel like it's not me that is going to bring that forward to you, please do step forward, because I have like a whole roster of people that I can send to you and we can intuit together who might be able to help you best, because I think it's important that we all come together at this time, everyone. But I'm going to park this here. Like I said, I think that this is going to be messages from a fractal of Mother Mary's energy coming forward at a certain point, because I feel like this idea of the mother and also the divine feminine energy stepping forward seems to be something that is being wanted to be brought into balance, because I felt very much like the fire within me when I was stepping forward, and, you know, the feminine rising, it felt like a fight, it felt like a war. And at a certain point I just knew that that wasn't the, you know, balanced energy to be being in. This is an expression of the divine masculine and the divine feminine coming together in unison to help us move forward. And there has been such a what do I want to say, imbalance for so long, that I feel like we wanted to come from a space of fighting through, and now I see it's not that. It's a surrendering into those, fine-tuning those balances of that energy and what is going to help us all move forward together. And there was some Mintakan messages that also stepped forward that I think many of you wanted to hear more from. So I'm going to see what happens, everyone. It's been quite the time acclimatizing back to these spaces. Like I said, at a certain point I just went, I didn't want a part of any of this, because I just needed to come back to myself. And slowly but surely things have been coming back into my existence. I've been closing down some dense timelines, which I'm going to be talking about again with the Darkness series when the time is right, because I had a lot that was going on in that space with Luciferian energy tying into the Freemasonic expression, all of that, everyone. So there is going to be more to come, but I'm taking it slowly. I'm trying to listen to myself and my balance and how I want this space to be for myself, being able to work for me as opposed to, you know, for teams of light, because at a certain expression there were things I was contracted to do. Now I kind of have free reign to a certain degree, but I know that my life path and my story is this. So I've been trying to share and be as most authentic as I can and as vulnerable as I can to share everything, everyone. But, you know, there was a lot of this. It was very personal to me. A lot of this that, you know, I felt very ashamed somewhere, because I know that it sounds mental, but it's been my life, and that's just, you know, that's the truth that I stand with, and I stand by my truth, and I will always share my truth no matter, you know, what that means for me. And I've always said I'm not afraid to pass. I'm not afraid for, you know, my life to be ended in these spaces. And yeah, it's happened. There's been times where I know that beings have tried to come and end my life. So, you know, there was a lot on the line at certain times of this, everyone, and something shifted a few times in this expression that I will bring forward at another time. But some things don't go to plan, and that is okay. And I think then we have to regroup. So if you feel like, you know, things have just gone to complete shit in your life at certain times, that's okay. Mine has too, but we'll always be rebuilding. And, you know, it's a time to trust your teams of light again when things haven't gone to plan. You know, we're all in this together. And like I said, I have a very individual expression with my teams of light, I think, because I've always seen myself as one of them. You know, it's not beings that I bow down to. I see them as family, and I know, you know, through a certain lens, and I've seen this point blank period. And, you know, I can't speak for other people, but in a certain space, you know, the galactics are put in the sin bin, we're put in the demonic realm, and I couldn't ignore the truth of that in certain circumstances that was coming forward, which left me with a big pocket of like, ooh, I don't know about this, everyone, for a long time, which again, I'm going to bring forward this in another video. So there is lots to share, everyone, but I'm taking it easy. I'm trying to ease myself back in, so please bear with me. And it's been super duper hot, so I don't know if any of that made any sense. I feel like I'm just literally sat in a puddle right now, so who knows. But thank you again, everyone, from the bottom of my my heart, everyone that has supported, helped, and I want to say saved us, saved the Light Renegades, because at certain points this got too crazy for us to even handle. And knowing that there was a community out there that were with us, that could understand us, that made sense to you, and half the time some things didn't make sense to me. You know, people step forward that I just did not expect from behind the scenes and sharing their understanding. I thought, wow, I shared that channeling for you. I had no idea, you know, fully what it meant for me, because it wasn't even in my expression. That's what made all of this, you know, worthwhile. So I will continue to show up when it feels in alignment, everyone. But those times that I'm not here, please know I'm very much here. And I'm always fighting for what I consider to be, you know, the lightest expressions, and having compassion for the shadow and the dark, and trying to find that space of where we can all be in this together. And that is definitely a story for another day. That is definitely something that I want to bring forward in a very different understanding. But I remember I said something very, very interesting. I didn't even catch myself do it, but the last video that I put out before I had a break, and it was called The End, and I said, God is taking the wheel, or something like that right now. God is taking the forefront of this expression. And that was not a verbiage that I would be using, you know, at that time. God didn't freely roll off the tongue like it does now. You know, there's been a lot that's been an integration space for me. So I thought, there was always that strain that was coming forward from somewhere, but I just wasn't able to sense it and feel it. And now, you know, there's been a lot of time of me reacclimating to, I want to say, this biblical religious stream, because yeah, I had trauma in that space, you know, and there's a lot of questions that still aren't answered for me. When I read the Bible, I'm like, I can't read this the same way that everyone else is. And I feel like we all are supposed to have this very personal expression of God. You know, God's relationship with us is very, very personal. And, you know, whether you consider God to be a man, the fragment of everything, a strain of consciousness, whatever that feels right to you, I feel like it's just important to be facing the true north right now, because there is a lot in other spaces that are grappling for your energy, everyone. And, you know, depending how high you get in consciousness, that's a story for another day. But in certain circumstances and certain strains of understanding, it's very black and white. Are you for the shadow and are you for the light? That is all, you know, that we're fighting against. And I think that is against us on a grander scale, and that is definitely, you know, a conversation for another day. But yeah, I've been looking at it all, and I've been given more information, everyone, finally. So I've been very, very grateful. But I'm going to pause it here. I hope that some of that made sense. But thank you again, everyone, for being here, for showing up, for showing support, and having the lives and experiencing everything that you've experienced. Because, you know, my life is your life, and I understand that we are all merely a part of this fantastic fabric of reality and consciousness. So I'm grateful every single day to still be here. But that's all for today. Take care.